I watched in disbelief as construction crews poured concrete foundations around my private lake for 57 vacation homes I never approved. What would you do when an overreaching HOA board and their greedy developer friends steal the peaceful retirement? Sanctuary you earned after 3 tours in Afghanistan? The rumble of diesel engines jolted me awake at 5:30 a.m. Through my bedroom window, I spotted a line of cement trucks rolling down the access road to my lakefront property. My dog, Atlas, a loyal German shepherd who'd served alongside me overseas, stood alert at the window, hackles raised. "Easy, boy," I murmured, though my own heart raced as I threw on clothes and grabbed my cane. 20 years in the Marines taught me to assess situations quickly, but nothing prepared me for this invasion. I'd purchased this 80-acre property with its pristine 12-acre lake 3 years ago after retiring from military service. Blue Heron Lake had been my sanctuary, a place to heal both physically and mentally from what I'd experienced in combat. The property sat adjacent to the Whispering Pines community, connected by a small dirt road, but my deed clearly stated the lake and surrounding 80 acres belonged solely to me. As I limped down to the shoreline, a man in an expensive suit was directing workers who were hammering stakes into the ground around my lake. Wooden markers with numbers dotted the perimeter, foundation markers for construction. "What the hell is going on here?" I demanded, my voice carrying across the water. The suit turned slowly, assessing me with cold eyes. "Mr. Callaghan, I presume. I'm Victor Harrington, president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association." "You're trespassing on private property," I said, gesturing to the workers. "Get your people off my land now." Victor smiled thinly. "Actually, we have every right to be here. The lakefront development plan was approved last month." Development plan? This is my property. I never approved anything. He reached into his leather briefcase and withdrew a document. "When you purchased this property, you agreed to certain provisions. Section 14(3) of the covenant grants the association developmental rights to waterfront areas for community enhancement projects." I snatched the document, scanning the fine print. My stomach twisted as I read the clause he'd highlighted. How had I missed this? After my last tour left me with a traumatic brain injury and PTSD, I sometimes struggled with detailed paperwork, which is why I'd hired a lawyer to handle the closing. "This is ridiculous. I bought this property for privacy and peace." Victor shrugged. "The Lakeside Leisure Homes project will benefit the entire community. 57 vacation rentals with premium lake access. Property values will soar." He gestured to the stakes. "We're being more than fair. Your main house and immediate yard remain untouched." A woman approached, tablet in hand. "We need to adjust the placement of units 23 through 28, she told Victor. "The soil testing shows—" "Mr. Callaghan, this is Rebecca Mills, our project manager," Victor interrupted. "Rebecca, please continue with the survey. I'll handle this." I felt my blood pressure rising. "You can't just show up and start building on my property." Rebecca eyed me warily before walking away. Victor's smile never reached his eyes. "All proper. Permits have been filed. The construction begins next week. I understand this is adjustment, but progress benefits everyone." "I'm calling my lawyer," I said, pulling out my phone. "Of course. We expected that." Victor handed me his business card. "Have your attorney contact me directly. Now, if you'll excuse me, we have work to continue." As he walked away, I noticed a sheriff's deputy standing by one of the trucks. Victor had come prepared for resistance. This wasn't an impulsive land grab. It was a calculated move. With shaking hands, I called James Parker, the local attorney who'd handled my closing. "Emergency," I said when his receptionist answered. "I need to speak with James immediately." 20 minutes later, I sat in James's office, the covenant documents spread across his desk. My leg throbbed from the hasty drive into town, a reminder of the IED that had nearly taken my life. "I'm sorry, Mike," James said, removing his reading glasses. "This clause is problematic, but it is part of the covenant you signed. The previous owner had agreed to these terms years ago." "You were supposed to catch things like this," I said, my voice tight with anger. "I specifically told you I wanted complete privacy and autonomy." James had the decency to look ashamed. "The covenant was extensive, over 200 pages. This clause was buried in subsection addenda. I should have been more thorough, and for that, I apologize. Apologies won't stop them from building vacation rentals around my lake." "We can challenge this," James said, leaning forward. "The clause may exist, but there are requirements for how the HOA must proceed. They need to provide proper notice and conduct impact studies, hold community votes. Did they do those things?" James frowned. "I'll need to investigate. Don't sign anything else and don't agree to anything verbally. Document everything. Take photos. Record conversations where legal. I'll request all HOA meeting minutes and voting records from the past year." When I returned home, more trucks had arrived. Workers were taking soil samples near my dock, where Atlas and I fished most evenings. My peaceful sanctuary was being invaded by strangers with clipboards and equipment. I took James's advice and began photographing everything. That evening, as sunset painted the lake in golds and purples, I sat on my porch watching the survey teams finally pack up for the day. My sanctuary had been violated, my retirement dreams threatened. The lake, where I'd found healing after the chaos of war, was about to become a vacation rental paradise for strangers. My phone rang. A neighbor from Whispering Pines, Margaret Simmons, a retired school teacher who often brought me homemade bread. "Mike, I just heard what they're doing," she said, her voice troubled. "I had no idea they were planning to build on your property. None of us regular homeowners were informed." "Victor claims it was all approved properly." Margaret's pause spoke volumes. "That's not accurate. There was mention of a lakefront enhancement at the last meeting, but nothing about 57 vacation homes. Something doesn't add up." As we spoke, I noticed a familiar car pulling up my driveway. Colonel Frank Westfield, my former commanding officer, who'd retired to a cabin nearby, walked toward my porch with purpose in his stride. "Gotta go, Margaret. Keep your ear to the ground." I hung up as Frank approached. "Saw the commotion today," he said without preamble. "Harrington's pulling something shady. His brother-in-law owns Pinnacle Development Group." I felt my military training kick in, gather intelligence, identify the enemy's weaknesses, formulate a strategy. Victor Harrington hadn't just declared war on my peace. He'd awakened the Marine in me. "I think it's time I attend an HOA meeting," I said, watching the last survey team drive away, "and find out exactly what I'm up against." The next morning, a fleet of excavators arrived at the lake's edge, their metal claws poised to tear into my land. I stood at the property line, recording everything on my phone as the workers avoided eye contact. Atlas stayed by my side, a constant reminder of the battlefield discipline I needed now more than ever. "You can't just watch them all day," James advised when I called him. "We need to work through proper channels. Proper channels." The words felt hollow as I watched strangers marking trees for removal. Trees I'd planted after returning home, each one named for a Marine who hadn't made it back. The legal system that I'd fought to protect seemed painfully slow now that I needed its protection. I drove to the county records office, a mission to gather intelligence on my enemy. The clerk, an elderly woman named Doris, recognized me from community veterans events. "Those Whispering Pines people have been in here constantly," she whispered, pulling files. "Something about expedited permits." The permits were all there, filed correctly and approved with surprising speed. But as I flipped through the HOA meeting minutes that Doris helped me locate, inconsistencies emerged. The lakefront project had indeed been mentioned, but the scope described to homeowners was modest community dock improvements. Nothing about vacation rentals or major construction. "Who signed off on these permits?" I asked, pointing to the county approval stamps. Doris adjusted her glasses. "Commissioner Jenkins. His signature's right there." Commissioner Jenkins, who'd been photographed at Victor Harrington's campaign fundraiser last spring. The web of connections was starting to make sense. Back home, Margaret called with more intelligence. "I spoke with other homeowners. Nobody knew about vacation rentals. The HOA board voted during a special session with minimum required attendance." I thanked her and hung up as another truck pulled into my driveway. A lanky man in his 30s approached, hand extended. "Sam Wilson, Environmental Protection Agency. Got a call about potential wetland disruption." Hope flickered. "Who contacted you?" "Anonymous tip," he said, glancing at his clipboard. "Something about endangered spotted turtles in this lake." I'd seen those turtles, small creatures with yellow spotted shells that basked on logs near my dock. I'd never thought to report them. Sam spent 2 hours taking water samples and photographs. "Construction this close to a verified habitat will require additional permits and studies," he explained. "I'll need to file a report, which could delay things. A reprieve, but not a solution. The EPA investigation might buy me weeks, not stop the development entirely." That evening, I attended the monthly HOA meeting at the Whispering Pines Community Center. The room fell silent as I entered, leaning on my cane. Victor's smile tightened at the sight of me, but he gestured to an empty chair. "Mr. Callaghan, welcome. We don't often see non-members at our meetings. I thought I should understand the process that approved construction on my property," I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. An uncomfortable murmur spread through the room. Many homeowners looked confused. "We've already addressed the lakeside leisure project," Victor said dismissively. "It's on the record and approved." An elderly man raised his hand. "I thought we were just improving the fishing dock. When did this become vacation homes?" "The detailed plan was available for review," Rebecca Mills interjected smoothly. "We can't be responsible if members don't read the provided materials." I stood up. "I have copies of those materials right here," I said, passing out the documents. I'd found... Nowhere does it mention 57 vacation rentals. Victor rapped his gavel. "This is not an appropriate forum to relitigate approved projects. Security, please escort Mr. Callaghan out if he continues to disrupt." A security guard moved toward me, but stopped when Colonel Frank stood up from the back row. "I believe Mr. Callaghan has a valid concern that affects all homeowners," Frank said, his commanding presence silencing the room. "As a member in good standing, I motion to review the approval process." Victor's face flushed. "Motion denied on procedural grounds. Next agenda item." As I left the meeting, several homeowners approached me in the parking lot, including a woman who introduced herself as Diana Chen. "I'm an accountant," she whispered. "The numbers they presented for this project don't add up. The projected revenue is wildly inflated, and the construction costs are suspiciously low." "Would you be willing to put that in writing?" I asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "My husband's on the Architectural Review Committee. He was pressured to approve this without proper evaluation. Pieces of the puzzle were fitting together, but I still lacked the leverage to stop the bulldozers that would arrive Monday morning." Sunday night, unable to sleep, I sat on my dock, watching the moonlight dance across the water. This lake had saved me when I returned home, broken. The quiet had calmed my hypervigilance. The fishing had steadied my hands. The wildlife had reminded me that peace existed in the world. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Check your property records." Again, "Look at the original survey from 1986. The cryptic message sent me back to the county records office at dawn. Doris helped me locate the survey referenced in the text. "This is odd," she muttered, comparing documents. "The property line in your deed doesn't match this original survey." I studied the yellow document. According to the 1986 survey, my property extended 15 feet further around the lake's perimeter than my deed indicated. A subsequent survey from 1998 had redrawn the boundary, creating a buffer zone that now belonged to no one. "Who would have legal claim to this discrepancy?" I asked. Doris frowned. "That's complicated. Technically, it could be considered unclaimed property under state law, or it might revert to the original township grant. Either way, it's not HOA land." A plan began forming in my mind. If I couldn't stop them from building on what was legally theirs, perhaps I could control access to what wasn't. Back home, I found Victor and Rebecca standing at the edge of my property, marking the final placement for construction equipment. "We're starting tomorrow," Victor announced with satisfaction. The EPA investigation was resolved. Amazing how quickly bureaucracy moves when properly motivated. I maintained a neutral expression. "I've accepted that you have certain rights under the covenant, but before you continue, you should understand something about the property boundaries." Rebecca looked up from her tablet. "The boundaries are clearly defined in your deed." "Yes, but there's a 15-foot discrepancy between my deed and the original survey," I explained, showing them the documents. "That buffer zone isn't HOA property. It belongs to the township, and I've just filed for exclusive use rights based on my veteran status under the Rural Veterans Land Access Program." Victor's confident smile faltered. "What are you talking about? There's no such program." "Check with your attorneys," I suggested. "The paperwork was filed this morning. Construction in disputed territory could result in significant penalties." As they huddled over their phones making frantic calls, I walked back to my house where James was waiting on the porch. "They bought it," I told him, allowing myself a small smile. "But we need to move quickly before they realize I'm bluffing." "About that veterans program," James nodded. "I've drafted the injunction based on the boundary discrepancy. It won't stop them permanently, but it will force a proper survey and community vote." Victor's car peeled out of my driveway, spraying gravel. The first battle was won, but the war for my lake was just beginning. The temporary injunction bought me 3 weeks, time I used to fortify my position. James filed motions questioning the HOA's authority while I walked the property line daily, photographing every marker and stake. Atlas trotted alongside me, his presence keeping the remaining surveyors at a respectful distance. My military training had taught me that winning required more than just defense. You needed to understand your enemy's motivation and hit them where it hurt most. "Follow the money," Frank advised over coffee on my porch. "Development projects this size don't happen without serious financial incentives." Diana Chen agreed to examine the HOA financial records she could access. "As a homeowner, I have the right to review certain documents," she explained. "They can't legally refuse." While she dug into the numbers, I received a certified letter. The court had scheduled a hearing on the property line dispute in 10 days. Victor had hired Jensen and Blackwell, the most expensive law firm in the county. My modest veteran's pension couldn't compete with their legal firepower. That night, a thunderstorm rolled across the lake. I sat watching lightning illuminate the water when headlights appeared on the access road. A truck stopped at the property line, and 2 men unloaded something bulky. By morning, I discovered what they'd left. Future home of lakeside leisure. Rentals, a massive sign hammered into the disputed buffer zone. I called James immediately. "They're violating the injunction." "Document it," he instructed. "This helps our case." Before I could hang up, Margaret called on the other line, her voice urgent. "Emergency HOA meeting tonight. They're implementing a special assessment, $5,000 per household for legal expenses related to community improvement projects." Victor was consolidating his position using homeowner funds to finance his legal battle against me. The community would blame me for their unexpected bills. I needed to change tactics. Defense and legal maneuvering weren't enough. I needed to go on the offensive. After sunset, I quietly kayaked around my lake, taking depth measurements and water samples. If this development proceeded, I needed to understand exactly how it would impact the ecosystem. The spotted turtles weren't my only potential allies. Diana's analysis arrived via encrypted email. "Found something critical," she wrote. "The vacation rental projection shows 85% occupancy rates year-round at 375 night. That's $6.6 million annual revenue at full operation." The numbers were absurdly optimistic for our remote location, but they explained the aggressive push. Someone stood to make millions. "Check who's financing this," I replied. 2 days later, Diana knocked on my door, looking nervous. "I had to come in person. My online accounts were accessed yesterday," she handed me a folder. "Pinnacle Development Group isn't just owned by Victor's brother-in-law. Their primary investor is Harrington Ventures LLC, which Victor owns. He's financing his own project through the HOA." The conflict of interest was blatant. Victor was using his position as HOA president to approve a project that would personally enrich him. Even worse, he was using homeowner funds to fight the legal challenges. "This is the smoking gun, James," confirmed when I showed him Diana's findings. Clear breach of fiduciary duty, but we still needed more. The court date loomed, and Jensen and Blackwell would find ways to minimize the conflict of interest. My breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Sam Wilson from the EPA called, asking to meet privately. "The water samples showed something interesting," he explained, spreading maps across my kitchen table. "Your lake sits on a critical aquifer that feeds into the regional water table. Construction on this scale requires special permits that weren't filed." "Why are you telling me this?" Sam looked uncomfortable. "Someone at the county level overrode my initial concerns. When I pushed back, I was reassigned. This isn't right." I now had an environmental angle, but needed irrefutable evidence of wrongdoing. 2 days before the court date, Colonel Frank introduced me to his neighbor, a retired FBI forensic accountant named Howard Greenberg. "I've reviewed these records," Howard said, adjusting his glasses. "There's a pattern of suspicious transactions between the HOA accounts and Pinnacle Development. But we need access to meeting minutes that haven't been made public." The executive board meetings, I realized. Victor once mentioned they keep those records in the community center office. Breaking into the office wasn't an option. But Margaret had mentioned that her friend Gladys handled cleaning for the community center. A quick call confirmed that Gladys had a key and sympathized with my situation. "I can't let you in officially," she said, "but I clean on Thursday evenings, and sometimes I forget to lock up until morning." That Thursday, after Gladys accidentally left the door unlocked, I found the executive meeting records in a filing cabinet. Using my phone, I photographed dozens of documents revealing the full scope of Victor's scheme. The executive board had approved transferring $450,000 of homeowner reserve funds to secure permitting and preliminary construction for the lake project, without general membership knowledge or approval, a direct violation of HOA bylaws. Most damning was an email printout from Victor to Rebecca. "Once construction begins, legal challenges become prohibitively expensive to pursue. Push this through before anyone realizes what's happening." Armed with this evidence, I called an emergency meeting with James, Diana, Frank, and Howard. We spread the documents across my dining room table, building our case piece by piece. "This goes beyond HOA overreach," Howard observed. "This is fraud." James nodded grimly. "We have enough to request a temporary restraining order against all construction activity and possibly bring criminal charges." As we finalized our strategy, Diana received a text from her husband. Construction crews arriving tomorrow 6 a.m. Board overrode court injunction claiming emergency powers under Section 22. Victor was making his move, gambling that once construction began, momentum would be impossible to stop. "We need to file tonight," James said, gathering the documents. "Wait," I replied, a final piece clicking into place. "If they're coming tomorrow, let's make sure they have a proper welcome." Dawn broke with the rumble of heavy machinery. I stood at my property line, Atlas beside me, as 3 bulldozers and a line of trucks approached the lake. Victor's black SUV led the procession, followed by Rebecca's white sedan, but they weren't the only ones arriving. News vans from 2 local stations parked along my driveway. Commissioner Jenkins pulled up, looking confused by the media presence. And behind the construction vehicles, dozens of cars lined the access road, Whispering Pines homeowners who'd received my mass email last night with copies of Victor's fraudulent documents. "What's going on here?" Victor demanded, striding toward me. "This is a private construction project." "Actually," I replied calmly, "it's a very public matter now." A reporter approached with a microphone. "Mr. Harrington, can you address allegations that you've misappropriated homeowner funds to finance a project that personally benefits your company?" Victor's face paled. "No comment. This is HOA business." "Is it HOA business to override court injunctions?" James asked, appearing at my side with a stack of papers. "Or to conduct meetings without proper notification to members?" Rebecca pulled Victor aside, whispering urgently. Commissioner Jenkins approached them, his expression thunderous. Margaret led a group of homeowners toward us, many carrying hastily made signs. "No vacation rentals and protect our lake." "We've called for an emergency community vote," Margaret announced, "since the board failed to properly notify members about this project's scope. We're exercising our right under Section 18 of the bylaws to hold an immediate referendum." Victor's composure cracked. "You can't just call a vote without proper procedure. According to these documents," Howard said, holding up the evidence we'd gathered, "proper procedure hasn't been your priority, Mr. Harrington." The construction crew foreman approached Victor. "Should we proceed or what? We're on the clock here." Before Victor could answer, Sam Wilson arrived with 2 EPA colleagues. "This site is temporarily closed pending environmental review," he announced, posting official notices. "We've identified endangered species habitat and critical watershed concerns." Commissioner Jenkins, sensing the shifting political winds, immediately distanced himself from Victor. "I was not fully informed about the nature of this project," he told the reporters. "My office will be conducting a complete review of all permits issued." Victor's face turned from pale to red. "This is ridiculous. We have contracts, commitments, the financial implications." "Speaking of financial implications," Diana stepped forward, "I've prepared a summary of the HOA funds improperly allocated to this project without member approval. Including the conflict of interest with Harrington Ventures LLC, the crowd of homeowners grew louder, demanding answers. Victor retreated toward his SUV, Rebecca following close behind. "This isn't over, Callaghan," he hissed as he passed me. "Actually it is," I replied, handing him a blue folder. "Court order freezing all assets related to this project pending criminal investigation. The district attorney found our evidence quite compelling." The construction crews began packing up their equipment. The bulldozers that had threatened my peace turned around, defeated by papers and community action rather than weapons. As Victor drove away, Diana approached with her husband. "The board's calling an emergency session for this afternoon. Several members are already talking about resignation." Commissioner Jenkins tried to shake my hand for the cameras, but I pointedly turned away. Political opportunism had nearly cost me my sanctuary. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal meetings and community forums. Victor resigned from the HOA board and faced charges for financial impropriety. Rebecca quietly left town. Pinnacle Development Group filed for bankruptcy after other. Projects came under scrutiny. A special election installed a new HOA board, with Margaret as president and Diana as treasurer. Their first act was to formally apologize to me and amend the covenant to protect the lake from future development. The property line dispute was resolved in my favor. Not only did I retain the disputed 15-foot buffer, but the court ordered a comprehensive survey that actually expanded my ownership by another 8 feet based on historical records. Environmental protection zones were established around the turtle habitats. The only construction permitted was a small community dock on the far side of the lake, with strict usage guidelines developed with my input. One evening, as summer turned to fall, I sat on my rebuilt dock watching the sunset. Atlas dozed beside me, grey now showing around his muzzle. The spotted turtles basked on nearby logs, undisturbed by construction that would never come. Commissioner Jenkins lost his re-election bid. The new commissioner asked for my support in establishing a Veterans Land Protection Program, a real one this time, not the bluff I'd created in desperation. Frank joined me on the dock, handing me a beer as he lowered himself into the adjacent chair. "Not a bad outcome for a firefight without bullets," he observed. I nodded, watching an eagle circle above the water. "The lake saved me when I came home broken. Seems fitting I could save it in return. The battle's over, but you keep patrolling the perimeter," Frank noted, gesturing to my daily walks around the property line. "Old habits. Just appreciating what I almost lost," I replied. The next morning, I found a young woman sitting by the lake's edge. She stood as I approached, extending her hand. "Mr. Callaghan, I'm Layla Wilson, Sam's daughter. Dad told me what happened here." "Your father helped save this place," I acknowledged. She smiled sadly. "He admired how you fought. He's been diagnosed with cancer. That's partly why he risked his job to help. He wanted to make a difference while he could." My chest tightened. "Another soldier in an unseen battle. Is there anything I can do?" Layla nodded. "He always wanted to fish this lake. I know it's your private property, but—" "Bring him tomorrow," I interrupted. "The base are biting near the fallen oak. I'll have the boat ready." After she left, I called James. "I want to set up a conservation trust for the lake, something that outlasts me." "Already working on it," he replied. "The state's interested in designating it as a protected watershed." 3 months after the confrontation, I hosted a gathering at my lakeside home. Neighbors who had become allies, officials who had chosen integrity over expediency, and Sam Wilson. Thinner now, but smiling as he reeled in his third base of the day, Margaret presented me with a framed document, the new community charter with permanent protections for Blue Heron Lake. Diana unveiled the sign that would replace Victor's. Gaudy advertisement: Blue Heron Nature Preserve, protected watershed and wildlife habitat. As everyone enjoyed the afternoon, Howard pulled me aside. "Found something you should know. Victor wasn't just building vacation rentals for profit. He showed me permits filed with the State Water Authority. He was planning to bottle and sell the aquifer water. The homes were just phase 1. My lakefront paradise had been targeted for exploitation beyond what I'd imagined. The quiet water that had healed my soul would have been pumped into plastic bottles for corporate profit." That evening, after everyone left, I sat alone on the dock. The setting sun painted the water gold, just as it had when I first visited this property and felt peace settle into my bones after years of combat. My phone buzzed with a text from Layla. "Dad says it was the best day he's had in years. Thank you for sharing your sanctuary." I looked out over the protected water, the preserved shoreline, the thriving wildlife. My battle for Blue Heron Lake wasn't just about property rights or standing up to corrupt officials. It was about protecting sacred spaces, the quiet corners of the world where healing happens. The water lapped gently against the dock. Atlas rested his head on my lap. For the first time since returning from war, I felt the mission was truly complete. 1 year to the day after construction crews had first invaded my property, I stood at the lake's edge, hosting a different kind of gathering. Families from Whispering Pines community played along the shore, children splashing in the designated swimming area we'd established together. The new community agreement allowed controlled access to the lake while preserving its natural beauty and my privacy. Where Victor had planned to build vacation home Number 37, we'd instead created a memorial garden honoring fallen veterans. Sam Wilson, now in remission, helped plant native wildflowers around a simple stone monument. "Strange how things turn out," Margaret said, joining me as I watched the scene. "Victor's legal defense bankrupted him. He's working at his brother-in-law's car dealership now." I smiled. "And the old disputed boundary is now a teaching area for local schools about aquatic ecosystems." Diana approached with a folder. "The final paperwork for the Blue Heron Veterans Retreat. 6 cabins on your western property line. Specifically, for combat veterans needing peace and recovery. Fully funded by the State Veterans Program. The idea had come to me during the darkest days of the legal battle. If this lake had healed me, perhaps it could help others too. The carefully planned retreat would provide the same sanctuary I'd found here, while keeping the lake itself protected." Later that evening, as the community celebration wound down, Commissioner Taylor, Jenkins' replacement, pulled me aside. "The state legislature is using your case as a model for HOA reform," she said. "The Callaghan Act will require transparency and community approval for major development projects." As the last visitors departed, I walked the shoreline with Atlas. Where bulldozers had once threatened, native plants now thrived. Where conflict had raged, community had formed. My legal trap hadn't just saved my lake, it had created something better than I'd ever imagined, a legacy of protection for the healing powers of nature, and a reminder that sometimes the most important battles are fought with documents instead of weapons.